It's Tuesday the 6th of December 2005, and word is that later this week on Thursday, ABC News Network Television in the US will focus on the case of Christine Maggiore and what happened to her daughter Eliza Jane. And Christine joins us today, here on The Next Level, on breakfornews.com.
Would you do me a favor and push me on to the next level?
And this is Fintan Dunne reporting. Thank you for joining us. Christine Maggiore is the founder of Alive and Well AIDS Alternatives, and she has been a relentless campaigner for the rights of individuals to fair and accurate information about the drugs which are used to treat AIDS and the determinations which go into making up an AIDS diagnosis. Having herself tested positive, then negative and indeterminate, she realised there was something wrong with HIV/AIDS, and her investigations have led her to become one of the world's foremost challengers to the orthodoxy surrounding HIV/AIDS. It came as a shock to her husband Robin Scovill, and their son Charlie, when his younger sister, Eliza Jane Scovill, died suddenly about 36 hours after having received amoxicillin, prescribed for what seemed like a fairly straightforward childhood respiratory infection. And while still coming to terms with all that, the family was horrified to find the LA County Coroner determining that young Eliza Jane died due to AIDS-related pneumonia. Christine will be joining us in just a moment, but since that determination by the coroner, which they strongly contested, a second opinion pathology report by Dr. Mohammed Al-Bayati, who investigates unjust convictions based on bad medical evidence, found that Eliza Jane had in fact died as a result of a side effect of amoxicillin. She had suffered, he found, a type of anaphylactic shock reaction to the medication. Now, despite the coroner's findings, an investigation already conducted by Los Angeles Child Welfare could find no grounds on which Charlie should be removed from his parents' custody. Nevertheless, a police investigation to see if charges of some type of criminal neglect may yet be filed against Christine and Robin is still ongoing. And now, on Thursday, reportedly, ABC News 2020 will be focusing on what happened to Eliza Jane. Now, Christine has been on the show before, and she's joining us on the phone now from Los Angeles. Christine, you're very welcome once again to The Next Level on Break for News.
Thank you, Fintan.
How is it going for yourself, Robin and Charlie? I'm sure it has been a very difficult time.
It's difficult, it's exhausting, and it's challenging. It's the holiday time, as you know, and it was also Eliza Jane's birthday this past Saturday, so it's been a difficult time, certainly.
Part of it is just coming to terms with it. Eliza Jane was such a vibrant young child. It's hard to come to terms for many people, even just who know you, Christine. It's just so hard to come to terms with what's happened.
It's like a throbbing, empty space that its emptiness is like a wound. It just doesn't heal. It's an emptiness that is loud and noticeable and very painful. And it's, like I said, a very difficult time.
Well, has that been helped by the new report, a new pathological report which has been prepared by Dr. Mohammed Al-Bayati, and he has identified an alternative cause of Eliza Jane's death to the one proposed by the coroner, James K. Ryby. Has that helped?
Death is death. If it's caused by one thing or another, the person that you love is still gone. They're missing from your life, and it's also, to a certain extent, as though our daughter has died multiple times. I watched her have essentially what appeared to be a heart attack here at home and revived by the paramedic team and brought to the hospital, where she died again 5 hours later. Then we waited 4 months to hear from the coroner on what happened. And when we got that announcement, it was almost another form of death. And now with Mohammed's report, she's died yet another time. So while the information that Mohammed puts forth certainly coincides with what we observed, what was observed by 3 pediatricians, and it coincides with the child we knew, who we just sent some footage to ABC Primetime, who is doing a segment that alleges to tell our side of the story. And in that, a week before she became ill, there's Eliza Jane at her friend's birthday party, blowing over and over again a party horn, the one with the long curly thing that sticks out when you blow it and retracts when you breathe in, over and over and over again. This child that, a few weeks later would be said to have died of fatal pneumonia. It's just, the report puts into a more realistic perspective what happened to our beautiful daughter, but it certainly doesn't make us want to jump up and down and have a glass of champagne. It's all just still very, very hard.
Yeah. It's very hard to reconcile what you've just described, a child with very good lung function, with the coroner's opinion that this was a child which was literally weeks from death as a result of AIDS-related pneumonia. It just doesn't add up, does it? Well,
yeah, it doesn't add up. This whole process has been so surrealistically nerve-wracking, I can't tell you. It's the coroner's words don't match his own words in his autopsy report when the cameras are rolling. There's so many contradictions between his own statements and with the facts of our reality. It's just, patience is not even a big enough word to describe what it takes to get through this.
Can you just outline for me what her health condition was like in those first 2 weeks of May, from the 1st to the 14th? How was she doing over that period?
Well, it started out with a cold, like a cough and stuff. There were kids at school that had coughs for 3 months. While they weren't particularly sick, it was just concerning, all the respiratory infections. So I wanted to bring her to see the pediatrician, which I did, and I made sure that I explained that I wanted a very careful examination of her lungs because that concerned me. And they did that. And not only that, they put her on an oxygen meter. And her breathing was normal at that first visit according to the oxygen meter. The second pediatrician, I took her there a few days later, and by then her cough was pretty much gone. And he noted the same. He went through the same routines, looking in her eyes, looking in her nose, looking in her ears, looking down her throat, feeling her lymph nodes, feeling, the outside of her body to see if any of her organs are distended or anything's going on. And everything was fine except what the first pediatrician noted, which was fluid in her ears. In absence of any other symptoms, that's what he went with, that we should watch. We should watch how she's feeling with regard to that ear. And he even suggested getting her outside a little more, taking her to the park, taking her on walks, and so forth. So he certainly didn't have serious concerns about her health, but because he knows us, he said, call me and check in with me, which we did. And we were happy to report the next week that her snotty nose had cleared up. As a matter of fact, she was coughing such these delicate little sneezes that she actually, for once in her life, wanted to wipe her own nose.
Right.
She always made me do it. And she was very proudly wiping her own nose. Then, because what I described to ABC News as just a stirring in my soul, we had the opportunity to see a third pediatrician who is also someone we know outside of his clinical practice and therefore sees our children in their natural habitat and knows them better than anyone. And so it seemed like a wonderful opportunity to have him come and see her and set my mind at ease. People think I'm so confident in all this. When it comes to my kids, I'm a worrywart. So this pediatrician was kind enough to come to the house. And he spent quite a bit of time with Eliza Jane and stayed for lunch afterwards. Again, the only thing he saw was fluid in her ears, which concurred with the first pediatrician visit and the second pediatrician visit. Then during that week, I talked to him a couple of times because it seemed like she was having trouble sleeping and she seemed uncomfortable. And when she's uncomfortable, I don't sleep. And I just, again, that stirring in my soul, I don't know what to attribute it to. Sometimes you have feelings, and you can't readily translate to physiology or fast-moving objects what those feelings mean. I had similar stirrings of the soul the weekend that a fiancé I had before I met my husband, Robin, he was killed in an accident. And those stirrings of my soul only later seemed to indicate that I should have probably called him and said, don't get on the airplane.
Right.
But at the time, they're just your insecurities, a bad night's sleep. You just don't know what to think about them. You only know in retrospect. And I was having a similar experience. It wasn't anything that, I got a clear message about. I just felt troubled enough to call the pediatrician and ask him to come by one more time before he left town. It was a Saturday. He was available. The other pediatricians are hard to chase down. So he came by the house and once again spent considerable time with Eliza Jane, once again concentrating on the lungs because of my concerns about the coughs going around school, and again said clear lungs. At that point, Eliza Jane was so lucid and alert and fully functioning that she associated his tongue depressor with a popsicle stick and said, "When you're done, will you join me at the kitchen table for a popsicle?" So we all sat at the kitchen table while she had a popsicle, and then he left us with the prescription for antibiotic because he said, "Now I see redness in her ears, and I think it's a good time to begin an antibiotic." This pediatrician is someone who does not prescribe antibiotics out of hand at whatever he sees. He's very judicious about the use of antibiotics, so we felt a certain degree of confidence in going forward with that. We filled the antibiotic prescription in the late afternoon and gave her her first dose that evening.
Can I ask you, how long was that examination, that last examination of Eliza Jane?
Oh, he was here. He looked, I would say he spent a good 20 minutes with her.
Okay.
Which is a lot more than you get when you go to the office.
Okay. So it wasn't a trivial examination, and it was one where he would have noticed a deterioration in her physical condition.
Oh, certainly. Certainly. I mean, she was arguing with him about his tongue depressor. I mean, she was carrying on with him.
And was
he
there...
knows our daughter, so, he's going to have a sense of, is something wrong, too, probably more so than anyone else who sees her just at a doctor's visit. My daughter's medical records do not show what the coroner, I don't know what else to say except invented, which is a chronically ill child. He attested to Eliza Jane being chronically ill when, in fact, her medical records don't show that. She has an older brother. We took him to school together from the time she was just a few weeks old, an environment in which most, quote, normal people become sick. Teachers become sick in preschool situations. Children, the classic line among parents is, "Oh, wait till your kid starts preschool. They'll get sick all the time. You'll be sick." That hasn't been our experience in this household at all, and it remained true with Eliza Jane, who traveled with me every day to school to take Charlie. And when I take Charlie to school, I don't push him out of the car and say, "See you later." We walk up to the classroom together. Eliza Jane was picked up and held by the little children. She played with them, and then many times as she got older, we would go on to our own classes. We had a music class once a week full of all kinds of kids, from infants to 3- and 4-year-olds. We went to parent-toddler playgroups together. On days we didn't do that, we had individual play dates, and we went to the park. This is a child who was out and about and seen by a great number of people. I mean, just remembered always for her beauty, her acuity, her incredible linguistic abilities, and those rosy cheeks and beautiful face. This is not a child who was frail and had dark circles under her eyes, and the police are asking, "Did you ever see her covered with sores?" No. She had chicken pox once, and she had chicken pox. Her brother brought him home, and she recovered fully. If you're immunosuppressed, you don't recover from chicken pox. It's just, there's two Eliza Janes. The one we know, the one in the medical records, the one that our friends and neighbors know and her classmates know, and then there's the coroner's version of Eliza Jane. And one of these is not correct.
Okay.
Where the heck was I when I went off on this tangent? Sorry.
Well, let's come back to it in a moment. I will pick it up, but I'd just like to ask you two things. One is, in that 2-week period, what were your observations of her level of energy and her appetite, for example, in that period?
Well, her appetite was diminished, certainly. It wasn't as, good as it normally was. And she was a light eater. I think that's okay to say.
Yeah.
Nobody's perfect. We're certainly held to a higher standard, but she was never a voracious eater. She wasn't a large kid. I'm a small person. I've always been small. My neighbors would tease me when I was little. All the kids in the neighborhood, "Stick out your tongue and stand sideways so we can see you." I was skinny. I was chicken legs. I was, shorty. I was always the tiny person that got the assignments to be boosted on other people's roofs because I could fit in small places.
Okay.
And my whole family is on the small side and on the thin side. I'm a size 4. The average American woman wears a size 14 from an article I read recently. But that certainly doesn't mean there's something wrong with me. It just means I wear a size 4. I'm not the average person.
Yeah, and even a lot of children, they will flesh out as they go into young adulthood, and they're quite slim as children. That's, yeah.
It's normal for our family. We've got an entire family of slim people, and that seems to work well for us. We're slim, high energy. We're good. We're good to go.
Yeah.
But this has become a point of contention with the coroner, who says that, she was frail and tiny and in the wrong percentile for her growth. It's so funny because here in America there are all these campaigns about childhood obesity. And certainly the growth charts, when you include the averages of people and you have a nation of obese children where obesity is considered an epidemic, the charts are going to be skewed to larger people.
Mm-hmm, of course.
So that as an argument is really annoying to me.
Okay. And the other thing, I wanted to just pick up on something. I'm getting the impression that despite your convictions about the nature of HIV/AIDS, etc., that these didn't bear primarily on your health care with your children, that you set your health care in terms of how you handled your children's health on a separate level where you were having it evaluated by competent medical people and not imposing your particular views. Am I right in that?
Well, one of our pediatricians, Dr. Paul Fleiss, said as far as he's concerned, it could go either way with HIV. He doesn't really know. He'd have to stand and look at all the evidence. He looks at the evidence of children and their health. And he's a pediatrician, and that's what he works on. So he's not firmly in my camp, so to speak, as some people have suggested. Not at all. Dr. Jay Gordon is of the opinion that HIV provides a perfectly feasible explanation for AIDS, and he thinks apparently that testing is a swell idea as long as somebody's not tying you up and making you. He seems to be in favor of that. So these are not what you would call dissident doctors. These are not people who agree with us. We chose them because they're the best pediatricians in Los Angeles. Dr. Gordon is so popular, he hasn't taken a new patient in 4 years. And in order to see him, you have to wait months. It's like trying to get in with a rock star. That's why when I had an appointment already on the books for Eliza Jane after seeing Dr. Fleiss, I figured I might as well keep it because this chance isn't going to roll around. I might as well go in and have him look at her again, especially because he was the last pediatrician that she went to for her annual checkup. So I thought it was good to go back there because he'd seen her most recently and therefore had a point of comparison that was more current than the point of comparison that Dr. Fleiss would have.
Okay. Well, that's certainly consistent with what I've encountered in dealing with how you handle the HIV/AIDS issue also, is that you are measured in your approach and you're not an ideologue. So I doubt it can be sustained that you behaved in an ideological fashion in relation to your own child. I think
that again is the fantasies concocted by people who don't know us. It is so easy to imagine all sorts of things, to construct all sorts of wild stories and spread fabulously interesting rumors, but unfortunately, unless you have access to the facts, unless you know us and know the facts of the situation, you're not in a position to really offer tenable comment.
Okay.
But that doesn't stop people.
Well, it doesn't, and maybe we can address that also. But perhaps you take us through what happened following that first administration of amoxicillin. How was Eliza Jane subsequent to that?
It's very hard for me to talk about.
Right.
Frankly. She didn't have a good night. She looked terrible the next morning. And it was very confusing because we were told that one of the side effects of this particular antibiotic is vomiting. We could have given her another one where the side effect is difficulty breathing. But if you want to make a choice between, evils, I chose the vomiting over the difficulty breathing as a potential side effect. And she did vomit the next morning. It wasn't profuse and it wasn't over and over again. It was just like a big old spit up. And she looked pale. She looked unwell. She lost her normal pallor. She did not seem comfortable. I spent the entire day with her except for a few minutes where I, went in the other room to get something and so on and so forth, to the degree that later after dinner that night, my husband relieved me so I could have dinner. Like, I don't know, it must have been 11 o'clock at night after, Charlie was in bed and things around the home were taken care of. He came in to relieve me so I could have some dinner. And when I came back, she was cold. She was so cold. And she was very agitated. And I tried to get her to fix on me and look at me, and when she finally did, I didn't know what to say except, "I love you, Eliza Jane." And that's when I noticed how cold she was. And I remembered sometime, somebody had said, when a baby's hot, it means their body's fighting an infection. It's a fever. When a baby's cold, it's serious trouble. So I said, "Robin, call a pediatrician right now." I was embarrassed to call again, worrywart mom here. And I put a lot of blankets around her, and while he was calling him and speaking with him on the telephone, she stopped breathing. She just stopped breathing. That was it. She just folded, and she just collapsed and stopped breathing. And I started screaming. He hung up and called 911. And then we had the 3 longest minutes in eternity that it took the ambulance to get here.
Let's just take it back to the morning, because it was still okay. In your mind, Christine, in the morning when she did vomit, you had been warned of that as a side effect.
Right.
And so you were set to go. Okay, you would have had concerns, but hey, it's not great, but she's going to have a reaction to the medication, and so it seemed all right.
She was drinking fluids to prevent her from being dehydrated. As a matter of fact, I was outside at some point during that day, and I commented to one of my neighbors. She said, "How's it going?" And I said, "I don't know. She threw up, and that's the side effect of the antibiotic. Now I'm worried about her being hydrated enough." I said, I'm in uncharted territory. We've never used an antibiotic before. We've never been prescribed an antibiotic before. We've never been prescribed any kind of medication for the children, not because we're refuseniks, because no one has prescribed it because they haven't needed it.
Yeah.
And, I've seen these rumors floating around that we refuse these things. We refuse chest x-rays. We refuse. There's no refusing here. If you ask our pediatricians, we always do what they say, and they never said anything other than what we did. It's just right there in the records, and those are immutable.
What time was the first administration of amoxicillin the previous night?
To be frank with you, my husband did it. I just have a hard time with doing things against the children's will that involve insertion of things. EJ was fighting with Robin about the antibiotic. She didn't want it. She was trying to swat it away, and so he did it. And I'm not sure what time. He has it written on a calendar page that we've kept, but I'm not completely up on that.
Okay, so the following day then, when did she receive further amoxicillin?
In the morning. I think it was about 11, and then later on in the afternoon, and it was before we were going to give, I think, the next dose that, this whole thing just to a tragedy.
And she had vomited in the morning prior to the administration of the second dose.
Mm-hmm. And she vomited a while after that. And then once again, just before I came in to have dinner. Just before I came back from having dinner, she'd vomited again.
Okay, and were your...
And it wasn't like retching vomiting. I just want to point out, it's not like her head was spinning and the scene from The Exorcist was... It wasn't like that. It fit into the range of what one would expect when administering a drug that has a side effect called vomiting.
Yeah, like an acid reflux type of vomit.
Exactly, that's what it was like.
Yeah, okay.
And again, Charlie never had an ear infection his whole life. This was the first time Eliza Jane had an ear infection. This was all new to us. Administration of antibiotic, all new to us.
And were you around Eliza Jane during the day?
The whole day. The whole day.
And how did her condition seem, or did she just seem
good? There's the darkest before the dawn. You get a little sicker before you get better when you're taking medicine. It's just, there's so much that... Had I been aware of what an adverse reaction to amoxicillin looks like, what the symptoms were, I might have been able to recognize this, but with the information I had, I assumed that everything was okay. We were treating her, in the best way possible for a simple ear infection, and as the doctor said, she would be better in 1 to 2 days.
Mm-hmm.
As a matter of fact, Saturday night I remember holding her and looking out at the night sky, which we often did, and I told her to pick a wishing star, and that we should wish together that she would be feeling better the next day like the doctor promised. And of course that's not what happened.
It was a very short time, Christine, wasn't it? It was a very short time to spot that something was going badly wrong. You just had that day.
Yeah.
It's terrible to think that can slip away in the course of a day like that. It's just awesome, Christine. You know what I mean?
It's a pretty terrible feeling overall. Yeah.
I don't know who would have spotted. I mean, 1,001 parents would have gone through that day just like you went through that day. They would have been concerned.
People give antibiotics all the time. You just don't think that the one time that we are asked to and follow without protestation, without any kind of qualm, this, perfectly mainstream, everybody does it kind of a thing, your mind is not going toward that. What would become the ultimate outcome? It just wasn't going there.
You didn't notice that she was cold then until about what time that day?
I can't say for sure, Fintan, and it's almost when I think about these incidents, I have trouble breathing, I just have a lot of trouble with this, and I think it was somewhere around 10:30, 11 o'clock. It must have been 11 o'clock. It must have been right around there, and we called the pediatrician, but I can't tell you for sure. The only thing I know for sure is the transcripts from the 911 call and what time she arrived at the hospital, because somebody's paying much more attention to these things than I was. As a parent, you're not going, what time is it? Here I'm doing this. Now what time is it? Should I write this on the calendar in the event that later on someone questions this? You just don't operate like that.
Yeah. Well, it's good in one way to talk about it because, you're talking to yourself about it too, even though it is difficult, and thank you for taking time to talk to us about what happened that day. Maybe it's good for you too to be able to hear yourself talk and to just breach some of the enormous pain that is around that whole day and what happened.
Well, we've certainly heard a lot of other people talk about me, and a lot of other people talk as if, they might have some special information about what happened, as if they know anything about our lives, anything about our daughter, anything about her medical history.
Well, what you're describing is consistent with the findings of Dr. Al-Bayati. She would have felt cold because her blood circulation had dropped. It was half what it should be, and if you have a loss of 15% of your circulation, you're in danger of a cardiac arrest. So she was at critical levels.
Let's point out right here, Fintan, before some of the detractors get on this, Dr. Al-Bayati's report was put together many, many, many months after this happened.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like I saw his report and somehow was able to change what I said to 911. We were able to change what I said to the hospital, or we were able to change anything that we said in our interview with the coroner's office. All of this predates our observations that coincide with the biomedical evidence that he brings forth in his report, coincide with that and happened before he ever created his report, before I ever saw it, before we ever even imagined that he would come up with this cause of death for our daughter.
Yeah. I can't see any fault, Christine. I can't see any fault here. I can't see that the doctor's to blame for the prescribing the amoxicillin. I really can't see any fault. This was just one of those things where we're dealing with potent drugs, and in rare cases you can have what happens with Eliza Jane, and that's it.
Yeah, and I wish the Los Angeles Police Department shared your views on that, Fintan, because we're still under active investigation.
The coroner, James K. Ryby, has been associated with a number of cases which have been quite controversial, his evidence in these cases. And many of these cases have been reported by the Los Angeles Times. So they're aware in the LA Times, before they ran an article on your case, that there were questions over this coroner. And those questions continue.
Yes, certainly there have been, as documented by Los Angeles Times, a number of challenges to Dr. Ryby's credibility. His ability to serve as an expert witness for the prosecution has proved particularly troublesome due to his changes of mind, changes of death. I mean, he seems to have a very long eraser on the end of his pencil. And there's something apparently known among attorneys here in Los Angeles as a Reeby box, which is more than one box full of DA reprimands, credibility challenges, and evidence of his testimonial changes that attorneys can examine in discovery when they have a case involving his testimony. And it recently came to my attention that there is a case now in Los Angeles in which Dr. Reeby changed his findings on autopsy reports 2 times after making a determination of death. So these people in this case, you know, how do I begin? There were 3 women found dead in Los Angeles. I would assume from the way it was handled originally that no one was thinking this was worth investigating, and their deaths were written off to cocaine intoxication. It appears then that the police found reason to believe there was foul play involved because they came back to Reeby and apparently told him so, in which case he changed all 3 autopsies on all 3 of these women to read death by smothering. Then the police brought in an alleged suspect, confessed to the crimes, but not by smothering. He said he killed them by chokehold. So the police went back to James Reeby, and James Reeby changed the death certificate on all 3 victims to chokehold. Then it comes to light that this gentleman who confessed to these crimes has an IQ of 62, which means he's mentally disabled and extraordinarily open to persuasion. And he apparently confessed to a crime he never committed because he was later found not guilty by DNA evidence. So now there's ongoing legal proceedings with regard to how this man was treated that involves the calling forth of the fact that Dr. Reeby changed these autopsy reports so many times and to coincide with a confession that was pure fantasy.
Just to put it in context for people, it's not a question just of defense attorneys raising questions. In one case, in the case of Robert Cauchi of Van Nuys, it was the Deputy District Attorney, Daniel Wright, who actually wrote an internal memorandum alleging serious errors in Ribe's testimony. He was concerned that prosecution cases could be undermined. Let's just take a look at the conclusions which he reached, and he reached the conclusion there was an AIDS-related pneumonia. Yet the autopsy reports and X-ray evidence indicate that there simply wasn't enough of an active infection. PCP, pneumocystis carinii, is found in lungs, even in lungs of healthy individuals. Obviously not in quantities that would be affecting health. But in order for you to die of such a pneumonia, there must be serious impairment of the lung, and that was not found on examination.
No, on visual examination, that was not found. On chest x-rays taken at the hospital, that was not found. What they did find, and as you point out, what they can find in perfectly healthy people is evidence of the microbe. We became friends with the family at school, become very close friends since Eliza Jane's passing. They're really wonderful people, and they've just embraced us so thoroughly. The father of this family, his brother died of PC pneumonia, the same pneumonia that they're alleging that Eliza Jane died from. In this case, this man was HIV negative. He'd received chemotherapy for a cancer, and it weakened his immune system to the point where this PCP developed, and he died of that rather than the cancer. And before he died, doctors did an x-ray of his lungs and showed our friend, his brother, and they said, look, there's nothing left of his lungs. It seems as though they've been set on fire. His lungs have been devastated. And this man at the time was still alive. Now compare that with my daughter and the x-rays at the emergency room that didn't show anything. There was no florid PCP. There was no rampant case of PCP in my daughter's lungs. And the coroner called us and spoke with my husband, the medical examiner, Dr. Shangstri, on May 18th, the day of her autopsy, after having performed the autopsy, after having carefully examined and weighed and measured our daughter's lungs, and said, right now, we don't have anything apparent.
And another conclusion which is reached in the coroner's report is that it was a case of AIDS-related pneumonia relying really on the discovery of P24 DNA. However, that's not particular to HIV, and it can be found in cases where there's nothing to do with HIV. Dr. Mohammed Al-Bayati has looked at aspects of this case which were ignored by Dr. Ryby, and he points to a conclusion that's substantiated by what everybody who was around Eliza Jane saw at the time of her illness, that she had a very severe reaction to the amoxicillin. And he found clear evidence of that in his report.
Yes, that he did present that evidence, and Dr. Ryby is trying to contest that evidence, saying the only legitimate reactions to amoxicillin are rash and fever, and there are 4 different types of toxic reaction to amoxicillin that are well referenced in the medical literature. And because of the report, Mohammed Ali Al-Bayati's report that is posted at justiceforej.com, a family who lost a 4-month-old baby over the Thanksgiving holiday, 2 days after administration of amoxicillin, has contacted him seeking his help. And it appears right now that they are under threat of police investigation for some kind of alleged negligence. And after reading the report online, they believe that their child passed in a manner similar to that of our daughter due to amoxicillin.
There are different kinds of reactions to amoxicillin. I think that's well documented. Yes, the classic anaphylactic shock reaction, and that applies to not just amoxicillin but to other allergens, famously peanuts. Those immediate anaphylactic responses do involve clear and immediate signs of the person's in distress. Many slower burning types of response to amoxicillin won't show up immediately, will slowly deteriorate the health of the individual. And that was what Dr. Al-Bayati found in the case of Eliza Jane.
The medical examiners ignored their own evidence in this case. It wasn't just her lungs that were full of fluid, it was the area around her heart that was full of fluid. All her major organs were grossly enlarged with fluid that had left her circulatory system. I'm not sure of the percentage, but it was something like 40% of her blood went into... How do you described it quite aptly during an interview that you had with Mohammed, Fintan? Could you just mention that again, please?
Well, water is lost out of the circulatory system and into other tissues, including the lymphatic system. People mightn't realize we've actually got more fluid circulating in our lymphatic system than we have in our blood system. She was at half of her normal circulation. There's no question that
right,
was...
And her organs were also grossly enlarged, which is another indication of a toxic reaction.
Mm-hmm.
And this evidence, though mentioned in the autopsy report, is completely ignored and not commented on by the medical examiner, Dr. Ryby, anyone.
Yeah. The findings of the enlargement of these organs ranging from 171% of normal to 124% of normal, they substantiate a case that this was an anaphylactic response which took place. There have been some incredible things said in the media, particularly in the National Review Online, where Catherine Siepp and Catherine Jean Lopez, the editor, have made some appalling comments. In one case, Catherine Jean Lopez lumped in your treatment of Eliza Jane in terms of how you handled her as a child with extraordinary cases like Andrea Yates or Amy Grossberg and Brian Peterson, who tossed a newborn baby in a dumpster. Hold on a second.
Well, once again, we have people who apparently are just eager to crawl out on a limb and make these outrageously unkind, cruel, totally uninformed statements in a large public forum without availing themselves to any of the facts, without contacting me, without trying to even find out what happened. And my only thought is that when the facts are in and carefully weighed and measured, perhaps that limb they crawled out on won't look so great anymore.
Well, it won't, but it has to be said they were primed by the headline on the LA Times piece on the 25th of October, which was headlined, "A Mother's Denial, a Daughter's Death." It set a tone, that headline, which wasn't substantiated even in the article, because the article did go into more detail, which indicated there might indeed be other causes. It was a very inflammatory headline, and it undermined any balance which was in the rest of the article. A mother's denial, a daughter's death followed by a question mark is a whole different kind of headline.
Well, that's not as sensational now, is it?
No. You were on the show here back in February, and as ever, you have been at all times meticulous and prudent in terms of how you deal with the issue of HIV in your public statements. And I'm sure that privately you were as meticulous and prudent with Eliza Jane in terms of her medical treatment. And that's the bottom line. That's the kind of person you are. I think anyone who knows you, and I know that many people may listen to this interview who know you, would say you're one of the most meticulous and prudent people there is in any public forum. You're very careful about what you do, and that extended to Eliza Jane. And so these comments are completely off the wall. They're missing the point.
It's almost as if whoever has the largest forum wins, and not having access to a media forum and then not being able to, because of the impending legal situation, speak for so long about what's been going on.
Yeah, so
it requires a tremendous amount of patience to make it through this time, but I feel that we will make it through this time with our sanity, our health, our friends and support system intact, and we will live to see justice in the case of Eliza Jane. I'm sure that they would have expected us to end up like so many parents in these situations of being accused of having caused or being negligent, leading to a death of a child, that we would be destroyed. We would be destroyed socially. We would be destroyed emotionally. We would be destroyed physically. We would be destroyed financially. And we would be destroyed in our relationship, Robin and I, with each other. And that's not the case. We have more friends than we had before. People who have come to us with open arms who know us. See, that's the secret. Get to know us before you talk about us. When you might find that we're not like the media portrayals and the blog discussions. They know us, and they can see what's going on here, and they support us. Robin and I have a very solid relationship. Certainly we have our difficult days, but this is not going to destroy us. We have tremendous support from our legal team, who they didn't know us from anybody when we walked into that office and said, we need an attorney. And they've looked at the facts, and our attorney has 40 years experience in criminal law here in Los Angeles area. That's the kind of a guy who can tell when his lanyard's being pulled. Mm-hmm. When you have that much experience in that area, you know when something's not on the up and up. And he took us as his clients and sticks with us and is extraordinarily supportive and extraordinarily helpful and just a wonderful human being. So, this I think people also assumed that Charlie would test positive and be taken away from us. That seems to be a pattern with these other families accused. The other children are taken away and put into foster care or even permanent adoptive homes. Charlie tested negative 4 times between September and October, and there was nothing that they could find anywhere, looking under every possible stone that they could find to look under, nothing that they could use to say that he is at risk of anything, and so they closed their case with no follow-up.
Yeah.
My husband Robin, unlike what the LA Times omitted, also tested negative multiple times in September and October, like Charlie. This again is inconvenient to this portrait of a family where a mom is able to spread some insidious microbe and this idea, one contact and you can become infected, quote, yourself. Robin and I have been together for 9 years. 9 years of normal relations that produced 2 children, and he, my husband, tests negative 3 times in a row, September and October.
All I can say is, I've seen Dr. Al-Bayati's report. Anybody who wants to persevere with this fantasy that Eliza Jane died of AIDS-related pneumonia is going to have to address the clear evidence of an anaphylactic shock reaction, which is borne out pathologically in autopsy and in medical records from 3 pediatricians and 911 transcripts.
See someone who works as hard and with, I would say, disproportionate compensation as Dr. Al-Bayati does on these cases. Dr. Al-Bayati goes just as follows. A man who was sentenced to life plus 10 years for supposedly shaking his baby to death was given a new trial based on Dr. Albayati's work, and that's an important case too in the medical and legal literature. The important thing here, and in all these cases, and possibly in life, is to look at the facts. You know, I just would love to see more of a focus on the facts in our case and these other cases.
Well, you know, others who have looked at Dr. Albayati's work would not disagree with my assessment that this is thoroughness of investigation to the point of brilliance. But nevertheless, it doesn't require considerable investigation in this case. The medical evidence is quite clear this was an anaphylactic shock reaction, and that's that. It makes the case for us that what we need is to work with the facts, Christine, and not this judgmental medical fascism which has taken hold and has resulted in so many cases of injustice. And in many cases, a less prepared and less medically aware individual than yourself might have been rolled over by the system, and many have. It's just that you guys are so well informed that it hasn't happened in your case.
In this tremendous misfortune, we are so fortunate to know the people we know, to have the friends that we have, to have the wherewithal between us and around us to guide us through this terrible time. We are so fortunate, and there has been so much light and so much beauty in this time of darkness and ugliness, I can't tell you. It's been a head-spinning process, all of this.
I hope it hasn't affected your ability to continue to work for reason and logic and facts when dealing with these issues, because there are hundreds of thousands of people dying as a result of medical errors in the United States health system. All we can do as well is celebrate the wonderful light that Eliza Jane was.
I'd like to say that I can look back on that and find a measure of satisfaction with the 3 years we had with her.
Yeah.
But I wanted to know her as long as I could. I wanted to live to be 100 years so I could be around that girl and watch her grow and watch her do and see those beautiful long fingers glide across the keys of a piano, to hear the funny things she always had to say, to watch her blossom into a beautiful young lady out of this beautiful, beautiful child. Yes, we had 3 years, 5 months, and 12 days, but it doesn't quite feel like enough.
Hey, it's never enough when it's that beautiful, when it's that brilliant. You know, you have every right to have expected that. But that's life, and that is life in terms of other parents' experience of the medical system. Many have lost and never even known why it was. There's nothing we can do about that.
Yeah.
You're not the only parent not to be able to see that fulfilled. You know, a traffic accident and things like that do cut short these dreams, and that's part of living and part of life, and we can't escape that. That's around us all.
I've been wanting to attend a support group for parents who've lost children, but this police investigation makes it so I cannot attend. I'm not able to speak with other parents about my experiences because that they can all be interviewed by the police, and anything I say that somebody might misconstrue or think they hear. So, you know, here we are grieving parents that can't act like grieving parents. If we were to follow strictly our attorney's advice, we wouldn't share any of our feelings with anyone.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, what kind of a grieving process is that? And certainly, again, we're fortunate in that there's no one to point a finger to between Robin and I and say, you left the pool gate open, you didn't strap her in her car seat. But, you know, sometimes you want to, however, talk to someone besides each other. And we can't even do that in our situation, which makes it even more hard.
You guys need this stuff sorted out and cleared up so that you can resume a grieving process and get closure on these issues, for your sake, for Robin's sake, and for Charlie's sake.
Thankfully, that boy has such a buoyant spirit. He's so remarkable. He's so funny. He's so smart. He's so like his sister. They even look alike. And he's really like a balloon full of helium tugging at a string. He just always wants to go up. He always wants to just, I mean, his natural state is one of happiness. And he certainly has his struggles with this, and he misses his sister tremendously. But his overriding instinct is joy. and he's got so much energy to express that, and so many friends to share that with, that he's doing all right. And we just got a little dog too, a little girl that fills our house a little bit, so it doesn't feel so empty for him. He's got a little pal.
Yeah, right. And let's hope that with the support of all of those who are grateful to you, Christine, and Robin, for the work that both of you have done in making sure that we deal with medicine on the basis of facts, science, and rationality, we can get rid of the witch hunt mentality, we can silence the judgmental critics who just love to dump blame, and I hope we can do that as soon as possible.
Okay. Me too, Fintan. Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Now, there are a few websites that you should know about. One is aliveandwell.org. That's the website of Alive and Well AIDS Alternatives, founded by Christine. Also, ejlovetour.com, which celebrates Eliza Jane, and justiceforej.com, where you will get the latest on the family's campaign for justice in this case. And at that website, justiceforej.com, you will get very shortly a new report from Dr. Mohammed Al-Bayati, showing some interesting differences in the way the coroner has treated this case and one previous case. You know, Christine and Robin have helped so many other people who have faced exactly the kind of charges that they're facing now themselves, and their intervention in these cases have been successful in helping people escape from what amounts to a witch hunt against those who dare to disagree with medical orthodoxy on AIDS. And so, considering the help they have given to others, they deserve our help and support now at this time of need for them. Now that more of the facts have come out, I do hope that ABC News will give a little fairer treatment to the other side of the story than we've seen to date. Anyhow, you will get more at justiceforej.com, and you'll also get more here, of course, because we're not finished with this issue, and we'll be returning to it in future shows. I'd like to thank Christine for taking time to speak to us and speak so openly to us, and I'd like to thank you for tuning in. That's it for this edition of The Next Level. I will be back soon with another, and I do hope that you can join me for that. But in the meantime, for breakfornews.com, this has been Fintan Dunne reporting.